So this week I'm continuing in my efforts to help you work with a process of turning your sketches of animals from the farm and the zoo into compositions. And this week I want to look a bit at collage. And you probably might have noticed that I'm having an exhibition in December entitled "What's So Great About Collage?" And I think I really ought to answer that question for you. So here are some collage pieces that I've been working on. There is an example here where you can see the forms of three cycling figures are torn out from different coloured bits of paper, maps, wrapping paper and so on. I've also torn out the shadows because I want to work with something of the pattern of shadow as well in the final image. So that's a first stage, and then there are others which have the subsequent stages of not only torn out shapes but ink lines, which is how I work, and then some oil pastel selectively applied to bring out colour, light, sometimes texture, although the thing I really like about working with some of these papers is that actually texture is often part of the first layer. The torn bits of paper that I've selected from often have their own texture and pattern, and I like to be inspired by that for producing paintings that are textured and perhaps also have an interesting colour scheme. So for an example like this, where I've got torn paper, ink lines and pastel, that actually has been the basis for making a painting. And in a way, the painting's not that different, but this is partly because at the moment I'm really trying to sort of consolidate this process to see how it works best for me. And I'm quite interested in some new ideas from this process that I might even, if I'm, for example, using map, I have a lot of road maps that people have given me over the years, which I use. So an example like this, you'll see that the sky is actually a road map. I'm quite interested in the idea of trying to even translate some of those very specific textures and patterns into the final painting, but I've not got to that yet. But here's the small, this is a postcard size painted version that's really been helped, as far as I'm concerned, massively by doing the collage process. So that's just examples of my work, but there's a question to answer then. What's so great about collage? And I would suggest a number of things. Firstly, it's about seeing shapes. So if you are tearing out shapes of your figures, of some of the other aspects of your composition, the sky, the land, by tearing them out, you're seeing them already. You're having to simplify them into the kind of major, important shapes that make up your composition. Secondly, you can rearrange those shapes if they're not stuck down. So you don't have to keep redrawing an idea every time you think it'd be good to move that giraffe to the left 1 centimetre. You can just rearrange them before you actually stick them down. Once they're stuck down, they're rough shapes, so they have to be refined. And the process of refining is always going to be selective. You don't refine everything because you find that a lot of it works without being refined. So it's selective refining. And then adding things like ink and oil pastel, these are layers. So you end up producing an image that's layered. And when images are layered, I think they often have depth, weight. They are perhaps less obvious. There are perhaps surprises and interesting elements that result from that layering process. And last of all, personally, I find it great fun. I know some of you won't necessarily enjoy doing a collage, but that's one of my main reasons for doing it. So I'm going to clear these away and get out some animal subject matter and show you the process that I suggest you experiment with. So the materials for working with this collage technique I have a piece of watercolor paper, so it's just slightly stiffer. You could do it on card, you could do it on paper, but this is going to be my backing piece. I have a whole selection of papers that I'm now starting to collect. Just coloured paper. I've mentioned the road maps. This is some really nice wrapping paper. Paper that's been prepared with acrylic paint. So that's just a package of stuff that I collect and work with. The usual ink and stick for that stage. And then these are some Sennelier oil pastels, which are just fantastic. That's lovely for the last stage of being able to put on some clear, strong colour. But you could use other oil pastels or even chalk pastels. And a glue stick. So I'll be gluing things down with a glue stick for this demonstration. With these ones that I showed you at the beginning, I'm hoping to exhibit these. So I've actually used PVA, and I've sometimes had to roller the cut out, torn out shape down, or leave it weighted, with a few books piled on top, bit of plastic so it doesn't stick, but weighted so that that's reasonably flat and could be presented and wouldn't fall apart when the customer takes it home. So those are the materials, and then let me have a look at what I want to produce as an image based on some of the sketches that I did and the monoprints that I did as well. So I'm going to work with an image based on the giraffes, and I want to continue developing on from the monoprints. This was one of the sort of line monoprints, the carbon paper type approach, where I then put some colour around and into the animals. And these were a couple where I cut out the shape and used it either as a stencil, or when I used the cutout animal as a mask to make another image, which I'm not showing you. This is what happened to the mask. It picked up ink in that way. So I'm thinking of an image with a kind of almost a forest of giraffes. I don't know, I might get down to the legs, but the key thing I want really is all of these long necks in different arrangements, overlapping, slightly bigger, slightly smaller. So I've an idea, but it's not completely formed, and I'm hoping that the collage process will be a way of exploring that idea and even finalizing it. So I've selected various papers. I'm thinking that, as I did in my monoprint there, I'm going to have quite high grass or high plain. I'm going to use a bit of this road map, which has got some nice blue in it, for the sky. And then I'm thinking of just some kind of sandy coloured papers. So that isn't big enough to cover the area, all of which is good because it just means I've got to play around a bit. But even at this stage, I can be thinking in terms of colour. So I can be looking for, that's all quite a nice subtle colour combination, I think. I might think a little bit, I'm trying to work with pretty simple shapes, but there wouldn't be any harm in creating a little bit of texture and variation. I'm just thinking for my background, grasses and things. So anyway, something like that. I want to keep it all simple, but I'm just trying to think. I'm influenced by what's in that monoprint, some of the tall lines of the grass, and a little bit of sky showing. So then I've chosen various papers for the giraffes. I think I'd like each one to be a different colour. So some of them will be, some orange and brown. And I'll try a black. And that's a dark brown, isn't it? Yes. So it's just got different papers here. And I'm going to tear them out. I won't make you watch that. Well, maybe I should. Maybe you should see me tear out one of them. Let's go for an orange one to start. So let's try this chap here. So the tearing is really, you know, it's like Matisse's cutting into coloured paper and sort of drawing into colour. So it's to be recommended. You'll find different papers behave differently. This is quite a thin, I don't know if it's almost copying paper, so it's fairly kind. I'm not worrying too much about ears or can't remember what they're called, but you know, the bony horn at the top of the giraffe. I'm just getting a basic shape and I haven't got all of it quite right. I could do a little bit more tearing up there, or maybe some of that tearing will, or some of that refining, you know, will be done with the ink and the pastel. Don't really want them to be too good because then there's nothing to refine. But that one's going to go there, and then I'll work on another one. Maybe I'll use some of this brown paper for that. So here's my next character. This is thicker paper. It was a bit harder to tear, and so it's a bit rougher, but that's fine. I thought actually I had made him a bit too big, so I tore some extra bits off to try and get the size right, and I'm thinking of having some sort of arrangement like that. Maybe that will be a bit lower. So here, you know, I hope I'm demonstrating well here the fact that you can rearrange things, you can move them around. I think the big chap in the foreground maybe should have a little bit more colour. He should be carried on like that. I didn't like the angle of his head. Another thing you can do here, you can actually, I can bend that a little bit. You know, I can get a different kind of articulation. Will it even go up the way it probably would? I could have him go up as they were doing at the zoo, feeding higher up. So I think I want a couple more. So I've got a couple more. This one is an odd looking shape. I want to base it on this particular view with the head facing towards us. So it's really going to be the drawing and refining that's going to make that work. It doesn't really work at the moment. And I've been doing a bit of head tilting. And I think this one I probably want to move it further over. So, you know, I can start to think about, play around with the rhythm of these shapes. In fact, it's better if it's closer up. Maybe these two should come over here. And I don't know why necessarily I'm saying it's better. It just seems to me instinctively that's a rhythm I prefer. Probably a bit of overlap would be good. And so on. So they're not stuck down, they can be moved around like that. And once I get to the point that I'm satisfied with, I will glue them. So let's do that now. I don't know what the best advice with this really is. What I sometimes do actually is, having found that arrangement, which I like, I just put a dot of glue here and there. Not enough so that if I wanted to, well, so that I can still pick them off to put the right amount of glue on. But if I've worked hard to get that arrangement, it's worth fixing it as opposed to just losing it in the process of, because I'll have to take these off now. You know, I could take, I want to glue. I want to get some glue on here so I can put I don't know that I need to be telling you this, but so that I can get the back, I can get the sky glued to that, and then probably I should get under here and get these glued down. But my point was to just stick the main figures a little bit, and then when I come to gluing them properly, I can just put a lot more glue on. But it just means I don't waste all that good planning at the gluing stage. So because you've been watching, I've not been that assiduous about gluing things down completely, but it is important that you can draw on top, so you don't really want too many bits unstuck that might make drawing more difficult. But I've now got my ink and my stick, and I'm going to start drawing really some lines, and that might include some of the details that I couldn't tear, or it will involve refining the shapes that I tore out. But I'm just doing a line, I'm imposing a line on this shape, and I'm referring to my sketches, and this is, I think, really satisfying because you've put down some shapes, they're a little approximate, and now you can do some much more specific drawing. And if the shapes and the lines don't quite register, you can see here sometimes I've gone outside the orange paper, sometimes I'm in it, then inside it, then that usually means that you'll get a lot more depth because of this layering effect. I suppose it's the equivalent of a lost and found edge. With some of the dark papers you can see it's quite hard for the ink to be seen. But of course when I work on these edges, it's not just introducing a line, I'm also going to be working with some of the background colour. So here where I've got that very shaky edge, I'm going to be bringing some of the background blue of the sky into the collage piece of paper, and in that sense it's the negative shape that comes into the positive shape. So it's refining that edge but in the other direction. And that was the one that needed some redrawing. As well as working with the shapes of the animals, I would like to introduce some texture to these background colours using the ink. Partly because what I've laid down as paper is all quite light and plain paper, there's no texture to it. So I think that would be helpful. Whether I even introduce some textures to these lighter giraffes. Could also do that with wash. I mean, I'm not going to use wash in this demonstration, but sometimes if you've got papers that are, I don't know, brightly coloured or just plain, and you would find it helpful to calm them down with some wash, the tone of the wash, then that's worth doing. Again, it's so much about simplifying. So if there is some value in making something like a pattern quickly, well, there is a value in it if you can find a way of doing it as opposed to painstakingly mapping out patterns with the pastel or with some other part of the process, then that would be better. So that's my ink. I've got to let that dry, and then I'll put on the oil pastel as the last stage. So I've left the ink to dry, which is important because if you want to put on some nice clean sometimes bright or light colours. With the oil pastel, then you don't want mixing with the ink to spoil that. So I'm working first with this individual, putting a little bit of pastel, particularly along the edge, but if I want to kind of integrate that, then I'll bring it across the body. So since that's, you know, a browny orange on brown orange, it maybe doesn't make that much impact. Let me try a little bit of the sky colour as well, though. Has to be said, I don't really have the right sort of blue. And this is, I think, part of what can work so well with this process, is that you will have perhaps, or I have selected papers a little bit randomly, a little bit instinctively, and so I'm going to have to continue that instinctive process of seeing how I can make them work. So if I've got the wrong blue, I can mix it. I can mix things a bit. But what I'm inclined to do here is spread it out in different places, and I might also combine it with some white, perhaps. And all the time I'm thinking about how much I want to preserve what's in the background of these collage papers, and how much I want to work over them, obliterate them, and so on. So I'm did a little bit of sky around there, and I think I want to just work a bit across the whole drawing, the whole collage piece, and just start to investigate some of the other colours that I'm going to include. I want to put that into the background. Let's go on a little bit more. So this one will be a bit different, because if I want a pattern, then perhaps I should just be doing the kind of lighter areas in between the dark patterns. I'm going to do a little bit to that one as well. So maybe what the main thing I want to really convey at this stage is the idea of refining, but not obliterating. Because, you know, what I enthused about at the beginning, the idea that this is a process that allows you to layer, then I don't want to obliterate the layers underneath. I want them to be visible. But it is definitely, I think, an instinctive process. And if you can have these different materials to hand, so that you can switch from loose torn shapes to refining with positive and negative edges, then gradually things will start to work. And for example, I think here it's beginning to work. I'm quite pleased with how that is working. Funnily enough, I don't know, I do have an orange. I'm not sure if I want some orange in there, but it might help. But what I've also found for my own use of this technique, I've ended up actually being much more colourful than I would have been. You can see that, you know, happening already, even with this one. I'm just drawn to gradually building up more colour. And I think my impression is that because everything is held together by these torn shapes, and then perhaps also a little bit held together by the lines, the outlines as well, I find I can be much more adventurous with colour. I can take colour further And so, for example, here, so I'm getting into a brighter orange. But also the torn bit of paper that I started with, that's beginning to show through as well. So orange on brown, I don't like orange on orange. I've maybe got to get a little bit yellower. So I'm drawn into these much more instinctive decisions about colour, for example. And I think that they are held together. They're moderated, maybe they're not moderated, but they're held together by the basic structure that these torn shapes give me. Anyway, that's how it works for me. And I've done things there that I would never have arrived at through simply drawing, through simply going from the sketch into a painting or even via a pastel study. This I find a really invigorating process. I get ideas about everything, about shapes, about the rhythm of the composition, about colour, about texture, and so on. So I wholeheartedly recommend it to you. Some of you will come to the studio on Monday and I'll guide you through this. Otherwise, I hope that you're equipped at home to explore this. And again, I still feel you don't have to be coming up with final decisions at the end of this week. I'll maybe put this in an email and talk to you about it at Zoom, but we could have an extra week, actually, when I'm back from Canada, and we could look at perhaps bringing together all these different approaches, the sketches, the monoprints, the collage, into an extra week to produce a final composition. Okay, see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.